Welcome, Internet Desians. See, I suck at words. To episode 11 of the Best Games period. You may notice that you don't hear the silky smooth Jack talking. Instead, you get the whiny and raspy Jeremy. Our buddy Jack is out with some tooth pain. He had a crown that shifted, and it seems to be a royal pain, and it's getting on his nerves. So we're going to try to do a show without him. So wish us the best of luck.
That was pretty good. Royal pain, huh? Because it was the crown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even think of that. Wow.
Oh man, you just pun in your sleep now. It's just like the puns just come to you naturally. You don't even try anymore.
Yep, it's just not even a process these days. But Jack, we do hope you feel better, very much so. And thank you for editing this episode that we're probably going to butcher in more ways than one. Like he is doing that, right?
Yeah, I'm not editing it. I don't care how much money is in. He's editing it.
Oh, poor guy.
Sorry, Jack. We love you.
But we are pretty resistant to do the show without him. Because he is kind of the foundation of the Best Games period. And he does a lot of the legwork and research. Resistant as we are, however, we're going to go ahead and give it a shot and talk about a little known game developed by Insomniac called Resistance 3. Daniel, have you heard of this game?
No, I just learned about it today, actually.
Yeah?
Yeah, so, I mean, you should probably tell me all about it.
Well, it was released in 2011 on PlayStation 3. One of the early games that had move support. LOL. And really, it's a post-apocalyptic shooter as opposed to where Resistance 1 and 2 were kind of more military shooters. But it's also got that Insomniac flair, like if you like the Ratchet and Clank games, that have just crazy weapons and just fun scenarios. And, you know, I kind of like this game.
Yeah, I lied just now when I said I hadn't heard of it. I was lying.
Oh.
I adore Resistance 3, so I hate to spoil the ending of this podcast right now, but I'm leaning towards Best Game period because there's so much that Resistance 3 does right. But before going into all of that, if you're not familiar with Resistance 3, it is obviously the third in the series. The first Resistance, Fall of Man, came out, I believe it was a launch game for the PlayStation 3. Or early launch window, at least.
It was day and date launch. It actually got a 10 from all the reviewers. Mostly Fantastic. Because it was the first, PlayStation 3 game. But
yeah,
it wasn't a bad game.
I only played maybe half of that game.
Okay.
So personally, I'm not very experienced with the series. I played a bit of the first one, did not touch the second, and played through the third one probably several times.
Okay.
So Resistance follows this. The setting is 1940s and 1950s America. Actually, the first one is in Britain.
Yeah, it's in Europe.
Yeah, it starts in Britain. Does it go through all of Europe? I'm not sure.
I mean, Europe's a pretty big place, but
I mean,
no,
does it travel around?
Yeah, it's not just in one area. It's been a long time since I played that game.
Yeah.
I liked that game. I liked Resistance 2, but Resistance 3 is the best of the series.
The series, I mean, it was always kind of like one of those historical fiction kind of stories. And it follows... The premise is aliens came during World War II and attacked the Earth, and everybody had to... Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. Everybody had to kind of band together to resist these aliens,
Correct.
these chimera, so they're called in the universe. And these aliens kind of take over people and turn them into aliens like them. And so it was sort of a Call of Duty-esque game, but with sci-fi elements.
Yeah. So in Resistance 1 and 2, the protagonist, the hero, if you will, was a guy named Nathan Hale. And in Resistance 3, there's a new guy, Joe Capelli, I believe.
Capelli.
And he actually ends up, spoilers, killing Nathan Hale because, as you say, the Chimera that do invade do end up taking over, people. And he really had no choice, but it was kind of hard to watch at first because I liked Nathan Hale. The cool thing to me about Resistance 3 is it does take place completely in America. And Americans find a way to finally defeat the Chimera, and then at the end you see the entire world mimic what they've done to do it, and everything is good again. Getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Mm-hmm. But, the story is fine, and I like it a lot, but it's not really the selling point. The gameplay in Resistance 3 is what I think is fun and amazing. I love the futuristic weapons. I like the idea that you can, use the bullseye or shoot behind walls with different crazy things and blow up chimera pods and it explodes around people. It's almost like Ratchet and Clank, except it looks more realistic, if that's the right word. I don't know.
Well, more true to life, I guess, maybe?
Yeah.
As usual, disclaimer, on Best Games Period, we will be spoiling Resistance 3, just like we do every game we discuss on the show. So if you care about the story details, before we get into the story, we'll let you know. But as far as the gameplay, you're right. I've never really played much of the Ratchet and Clank games, but I know what they're about, and the weaponry and crazy guns and imaginative, cool weapons that you get are just as interesting in Resistance 3 as any I've heard about from the Ratchet and Clank games. But like you said, it has kind of this realistic bent to it. But yeah, I friggin' love I don't know what the gun's called that locks on to, is it the bullseye, the one that locks onto them?
Yeah.
And just you can curve your bullets and just the bullets just follow them where they go. It's fantastic. But what Resistance 3 does so well as far as shooting mechanics go is it feels like a shooter. It feels like a Call of Duty. It feels like it's not quite as tight as say Halo. But it feels like a Call of Duty with these interesting enemies and interesting weapons. So it doesn't just have interesting weapons, it gives you enemies that force you to use those weapons.
Yeah.
I used every weapon in this game. A lot of games will give you fun, interesting weapons, but then you end up actually just using your assault rifle the entire game anyway. Resistance 3 doesn't let you do that. There are chimera that jump around all over the place. You need to use that bullseye, that weapon that locks onto them. You need to use that gun on those guys. Yeah. Otherwise, you're screwed. And there's other guys that the shotgun works best on, or there's guys that are active camouflaged, and you need the sniper rifle that can see them. And there's guys that hide behind shields, so you need the gun that can see through walls so that you can kill them.
Yeah.
And you're constantly switching up your strategies.
And it's so fluid to be able to do that too, with the weapon wheel, to be able to just switch between the different weapons. And it's not like
Yeah.
you feel like you're cheating. It doesn't make the game easy because the enemies, the Chimera, have the same weapons. I mean, they can shoot you through walls and other things as well. So you really got to have a little bit of strategy when you're playing it. I'm not going to say it's no Metal Gear Solid tactical espionage or anything like that. But it's just fun. It's so much fun to play with the different weapons and to kill these alien creatures, take back the world, and, save it. And the story does have some good moments in Resistance 3. It really does. You meet up with the Resistance people. There's some pretty sad parts early on when you got to leave your wife and all those other sad things. But yeah, the variety of gameplay that's in a post-apocalyptic military type setting for me was just tons of fun, loads of fun. It never got old, ever.
Yeah. One thing about Resistance 3 that makes me gravitate towards it is the similarities to Half-Life 2. It's kind of unavoidable.
Gravitate, Half-Life 2. Look who's doing the puns now.
Look at me. But, I mean, it's really kind of unavoidable to compare this to Half-Life 2.
Yeah.
If you've played Half-Life, especially Half-Life 2, even down to, like, the architecture and the art design, it's very post-apocalyptic, but with, like, a decrepit kind of alien, like, the juxtaposition between alien stuff and life forms everywhere with this, like, decaying Earth is just super interesting. There's even a section where you're assisting this crazy priest dude.
Yeah.
And you're fighting off a bunch of monsters. I mean, that's a lot like Ravenholm in Half-Life 2. But what it does for me is, I mean, it's original in the way that, like we just said, the way that it implements the gunplay into every aspect of it.
Yeah, it keeps it interesting, and it's not that I don't like straight-up military shooters. There are some that I do like. But, you can search, like this game allows you and rewards you for searching and exploring all the areas. You find some really cool dossiers, and you learn about how, Nathan Hale became, kind of taken over by the Chimera. You learn about all these other things that, if you just straight up play a Call of Duty game, you don't really get that type of stuff. And not dissing on Call of Duty games, Modern Warfare, Call of Duty 4 is one of my favorite games, and I am certain we're going to talk about that at some point on this show.
Oh, yeah.
But
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, it's neat, and it offers more backstory if you do that, but you don't have to do that. You feel like you really do want to save the people of your little clan that's in Haven, Oklahoma, when you start out, and then you see this, I forget what they're called, but those big satellite things that come over and just can annihilate an area with a tractor beam, laser beam, whatever you want to call it. And it's pardon the pun, it's a resistance to be able to stay ahead of that and get through it. It drops you off in some unique locations, and you end up being on your own. There's times that you have help, but for as short of a game as it is, the single player that is, it offers a lot of variety in gameplay and fun gameplay. And I'm not a big multiplayer guy, but I did spend a lot of time playing multiplayer in this game, and I really enjoyed it.
You'll have to talk about that at some point because I didn't touch the multiplayer. But I disagree that it was a short game. As far as first-person shooters go, it was like 20 hours.
Yeah. No, I maybe short wasn't the... Compared to first-person shooters, it definitely wasn't a short game.
Yeah, I mean, compared to Fallout, then it's definitely a short game.
Yeah.
But
it offered a lot of variety in those 20 hours, I guess is what I'm saying. It made it feel like you had more, more invested into it.
Absolutely. Like, 1 second you're fighting this giant hulking, like, gorilla monster thing, and then the next you're on a boat fighting off zombie dudes.
Yeah.
And then the next you're fighting this giant arachnid through a city and you have, like, no weapons. You have to just evade it until you can get a weapon that you can use against it.
Yeah.
And then the next, you're sniping dudes in the dark. Like, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I really personally enjoyed the boat part. I don't know why
boat
I did.
Part is just great. I think that's one of the things that Resistance 3 does really well. And that whole generation was... games were starting to figure out how to present cinematic moments in the gameplay. And I'd say Resistance 3 is one of the better examples of all games through that generation, because it never takes you out of the control of the game. It never takes control away from you. And even in moments like it does on occasion for the cutscenes, but for those big set piece moments, you're seeing it all through your eyes, and it's not cutting away for you to see certain things, but it expects you to see them anyway. So like when you are on the train and those giant things are barreling into the train, like, obviously you're going to notice it because they're there, but the game doesn't, like, put a spotlight on them or anything. It's just, it's happening, and you're there playing, and you're in the middle of this game, and you're getting attacked by dudes while these giant aliens are ramming into the train, and the aliens are just, they're not even attacking you necessarily. They're just in a herd, and you're in their way. It's awesome.
Next to the boat part, the train part was probably one of my favorite parts. It was also one of the more frustrating. I did have the most difficult time with that section. But yeah, there's like maybe a half hour of cutscenes in the entire game. Most of the gameplay is told while you're actually... or, I mean, most of the story is told while you're actually doing the gameplay. And there's not, quick time events to get you through those areas that kind of mold it together. And there's nothing wrong with that, and that works in a lot of games. But this game didn't do that. It was just straight up gameplay. Fun gameplay.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to talk about it without just saying, like, the shooting is a lot of fun. But it all comes together. It's the variety of situations that they put you in, mixed with the variety of guns that you're able to use, which they wisely allow you to hold all of your weapons all at the same time.
Yeah.
You don't have to choose just 2 guns at a time. Resistance 2 did that, and they realized that was not something they wanted to do anymore. That's not what Resistance really was at its heart. It was like they needed 3 games in order to really figure out what this series was and what it could be. And it's a shame that they figured it out with Resistance 3 and then we're done, because I don't think Resistance 3 really sold as well as they would have liked.
No.
Unfortunately.
I mean, they did have a PSP Resistance game. Resistance 1 had the weapon wheel. Resistance 2, they took it out for whatever reason, and you only had the weapons you could carry. But, this isn't a tactical, modern warfare. Right. I mean, it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be crazy in its own way. And I'm so glad they brought back the weapon wheel and the ability to just just cycle between the bullseye, the augmenter, the Rossberg, all those weapons, the marksman, and just have fun with it. And the level design, you had to choose different, like, even in any given level, you had to be able to do that, because some cover worked and some didn't, depending on the weapon you were using, and depending on the weapons that the enemies, the Chimera, were using, because they had the same stuff. I mean, the technology came from that.
Yeah, they implemented the weapons so perfectly. Like I said, you never could just rely on one weapon the entire game. And they would limit your ammo in certain situations, so you couldn't use certain weapons because you just didn't have any ammo for them. Mm-hmm. And, you know, through certain levels, you were getting a certain ammo type, and they were encouraging you to use that weapon. Yeah. It's very much... it's basic game design. I mean, they would give you a tool, and then they would give you what you need in order to use that tool and encourage you to use that tool. They would give you the weapon, the ammo for that gun.
Yes.
And then they would pitch you against enemies that were susceptible to damage from that particular gun, and encourage you to use it and play with it and have fun with it. But at the same time, it could be a pretty challenging game too.
Oh, there were definitely challenging parts. Like the train part was pretty challenging, at least to me. I mean, getting, fighting off the other enemies and then just getting rammed and having everything thrown out of whack. The boat, even the boat part,
yeah, the boat's pretty early in the game, but at the time, I remember it being pretty challenging because you just felt overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this scene on the boat where they're jumping off of the building at you. There's just dozens of them, and they don't all hit the boat at the same time, but you get frantic because it looks like they're going to.
You don't know which ones will and which ones won't, so it's just kind of mass chaos, and you have to kind of adapt and learn, how to deal with that. And I don't think that's a bad gameplay mechanic. I know that a lot of that's used on older systems, but it worked well in this game.
Yeah, I think this game did a lot of things that are maybe looked down upon as kind of a relic of that generation, but I think this is one of the games that proves that is perfectly fine, and as long as you do those things right and you have smart design choices, and you implement your story well, you weave it into those set piece moments. Like, I think people frown upon set piece moments now, as kind of like this Call of Duty thing that we shouldn't really encourage. But it's like, I'm sorry, like, I enjoy it. It's really, well, when it's done well, there's nothing like it. I mean, sure, I could go out and watch a movie, but for me, games like Resistance 3 are a lot more satisfying. The action sequences are more satisfying for me than an action sequence in a film or something, because you're interacting with it. You're there. You have some control over what's going on, at least, even if it's minimal. You're just that much closer to the action, and you're seeing it from different angles. You're not this disembodied camera. You're controlling it. You're seeing it, and I think one of the things that I love about Resistance 3 also is kind of like the movie War of the Worlds, the Steven Spielberg, Tom Cruise movie. I think that's a really underrated movie. This might seem like a real tangent, but I think that's an underrated movie. And one of the things that movie does so well is that it shows this alien invasion all from the viewpoint of humans. And Resistance 3, you feel incredibly small in that game.
Well, by the time Resistance 3 comes around, there's only like 10% of humanity left. I mean, the Chimera have overtaken the entire world. And that's why, it's awesome at the end when, again, America, of course I'm a, proud American. But, when the Americans figure it out and they are able to transmit that message, which wasn't easily done either because they had to get all that crap together just to be able to do it. And then you see the Chimera fall in London and, other places. I don't know the specific names, but all over the globe. And it's just it just kind of leads to that, humanity will survive, and thanks to America. I love that.
It's kind of reminiscent of Independence Day.
Yeah.
And they're like, spread the word.
Yeah.
Tell them all how to take them down or something
like
that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is very similar to that. So, Daniel, clearly you and I enjoy this game. I think we're both going to call it one of the best games, period, at the end of the show. Not everybody loved this game. It got fairly well ratings overall, but the people that didn't like it really didn't like it. You have any thoughts on that? And I'm not just calling out Dan Reichert, I promise.
Can we? I want to actually have a discussion specifically about Dan Reichert's review, because I remember you and I particularly took, not offense, but just were... Umbrage? Is umbrage the right word? Where's Jack?
You're asking me? I'm about to say soliloquy.
We disagreed with his review pretty vehemently.
And we're not ones to disagree with reviews. In fact, that's the only review that I ever think I've lashed out against. Like, reviews are reviews. I mean, they're certainly subjective. But it almost felt like he just wanted a Call of Duty game, and it was not.
Yeah, I think I want to go into his review because I think it's actually the reason I want to single out his review specifically is because I think it...
And this is when Dan Reichert worked for Game Informer, just FYI.
I think it represents the mentality of a lot of people at that time and why Resistance 3 didn't succeed commercially and necessarily critically as much as it could have, or why it had some mixed reviews. So here's some of the stuff he says. As you progress through these areas, the combat situations feel anything but dynamic. Each one is scripted beat by beat, with waves of enemies appearing like clockwork whenever you cross an invisible line. The only element that shakes up these sequences is the omission of a regenerating health system. When you're desperately sprinting across the battlefield to collect a health pickup, it adds a sense of urgency to the proceedings, knowing you can't just duck behind a rock for 5 seconds. So, right there, he's talking about what I was just talking about. Everything's very scripted. There is a lot of scripting in Resistance 3, but... And I can sort of understand what he's saying, because they have... They don't necessarily craft very many open battlefield areas. You might not be on a corridor, but it kind of is a corridor. The train is very enclosed, and there's just guys coming in from the jeeps onto the train. The boat is very much the same thing. You're on kind of this on rails sort of thing. And there's Chimera coming onto the boat. There's big giant robots. There's flying dudes. And it's kind of this roller coaster ride that you're on, and you don't have much control over positioning, and that can take away from the dynamics of it. I understand that a little bit. I think he's... I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Well, I could be shooting from the hip here, but if I remember right, the game he reviewed directly before that was Black Ops, and he loved it. And I guess what felt odd to me is how he discounted Resistance 3 for the same types of things that Black Ops does the entire game, when Resistance 3 does it at times. You can't always hide behind a rock. To me, that's the beauty of it. I mean, you have to move. You have to be able to find different ways of cover and different ways of approaching things because of the crazy weapons. Yes, of course, in the real world, there's not weapons that can shoot through walls and shoot through rocks. And well, there are weapons now that can curve to where you are. But, I mean, there weren't at the time. At least not mainstream. They might have been still being developed. It just seemed to me like it was kind of like he didn't like it as much as Call of Duty, therefore it wasn't good. And I don't know. I did take exception with his review, which again I don't know that I've ever done with another game. I really don't. I mean, short of Jim Sterling giving like Final Fantasy 13 a 1 out of 10 or whatever it was he did, but that's just absurd. I mean, that's different.
I mean, I think you're right. There was this weird disconnect because we're singling him out, but like I said, I think his opinion was very representative of a lot of people at that time. Call of Duty is still one of the biggest franchises in the world and was at its peak at that time, especially when the first Black Ops came out. And it's just really strange to me to say that Resistance 3 is rigid and doesn't allow for much gameplay variety or freedom when other games at the time, in my opinion, other shooters were far more constricting, just in different ways. You had, I mean, Black Ops and all of Call of Duty. A lot of times those firefights, you're just sitting undercover and you're waiting for guys to pop up and you shoot them, and then you move to another point and more guys are there and you sit in cover and you pop up and shoot them. Resistance 3, those enemies that are constantly changing up and forcing you to change tactics, they don't let you do that. And like he says in the review, the lack of regenerating health is key to that. You had to move, and it was frantic.
It was frantic.
It used those old tropes of first-person design, the weapon wheels and the health packs and shields. It used them so effectively. Mm-hmm. I loved it. Another thing that he calls out are the glitches. And I don't know, did you experience
I didn't personally experience glitches. I will say it wasn't the most gorgeous PS3 game ever.
No.
No doubt about that. And kind of to balance Dan Reichert, Stephen Lambrecht's review on IGN, which was a 9 out of 10, kind of loved it for all the reasons Dan did not.
Right. And Colin Moriarty has talked a lot about this game and how much
he just happened to not be the one who reviewed it for IGN at that time, but I'm pretty sure he would have given it a pretty high score as well.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those games that people love or hate for whatever reason. Overall, it's done fairly well. It's got, probably it's got like an 85 on Metacritic and a total aggregate of like 83.4. And this was, in 2011, when that was still a pretty good score. 2012, 13 is when anything that got below a 9 was considered absolutely terrible. But yeah, it's a fun game. It's a game that's easy to pick up and easy to play. You don't have to be, and maybe this is why I liked it. I'm not that great at shooters. I've said that many times, and I'm going to continue to say it. But this was a game that I could understand. I got it. I could play it. I could have fun. I didn't get frustrated. I didn't have to play the same levels over and over. When I play Call of Duty, for example, I suck the first few times when I go through a level, but after that, I'm just fine because it doesn't change. I mean, you learn and adapt. In this game, you have to learn and adapt as you go, and I think I'm better at that. And it gives me more tools to be able to adapt where maybe other straight-up shooters do not. And I'm also, a bigger fan of the ability to take, cover and see myself in cover, like third person. I guess that's why I like Uncharted. I don't know. But
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because Resistance 3 kind of came at the time when I was moving towards third-person shooters too, like Uncharted 2 and Gears of War 2. I'm actually one of those weird people that likes Gears of War 2 better than any other Gears of War. But all those games came out around that time. And I remember just like I gravitated towards those games, Dead Space more than Dead Space 2. Gravitated towards those more than the shooters of the time, like Call of Duty. I enjoyed Modern Warfare 2 and Black Ops, but I don't remember those as fondly. But for whatever reason, and I think it is because it bucks some of those modern trends, Resistance 3 stands out as a game that still holds up. And I played it just probably 2 years ago, fairly recently. Again, I've probably played through Resistance 3 times, maybe. And yeah, I have nothing but fond memories for that game and the what it does. But let's talk about the story a bit.
Okay.
So you said that the story is not really a big factor for you. That's not really what you love about Resistance 3.
I enjoy the story, but the gameplay to me stands out, I guess, yes.
Yeah. Personally, I actually really liked the story. I was surprised at how much I liked it.
Okay.
I didn't know the characters. I didn't really know Joseph Capelli. I didn't know the doctor. Can't remember his name now. I didn't know those characters going into this game. But they set up Joe really well at the beginning with his wife and his son.
Malakov.
Fyodor
Malakov. I always wanted to call him Frodo Malakov.
So I know that Malakov was kind of almost like a bad guy, sort of like a traitor in the first two games.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Well, I mean, he was kind of a... I mean, yes, I can, in the best way that I can. He was kind of this mad scientist that did crazy experiments on things. But it was also, I mean, good God, the world was at war with this crazy alien race. And somebody had to do it. I'm not saying Hell Hydra or anything here, but, he needed a way to be able to fight the Chimera effectively. And that was very hard in Resistance 1 and 2, which is why during that time, that's when 90% of the population got wiped out. He eventually did, and I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here because it's been a while since I played all three games, find a way to understand, I guess I should say, more than fight them, and understand how they work. They were a hive-type mentality, and... that's kind of why Nathan Hale had to get somewhat sacrificed so that they could use his knowledge that he had, because the Chimera had overtaken him, to be able to defeat the Chimera. So he's one of those mad scientists that kind of needed to be in a roundabout way.
Yeah, sure. Kind of like the scientists we were talking about in the Braid episode.
Yeah.
But I think their relationship and the way Joseph, there's a history there.
Yeah.
At the beginning, whether you know those characters or not, that you can see there's a history. At the beginning when they realize what they need to do and that they need to, when Malakov comes to find Joe during this attack of the Chimera on his home.
And speaking of story, if you just remember the game when they're in, Haven, Oklahoma, and they're all underground and they think that they're fairly safe, and of course, at that point it's kind of, everything's structured. There's one person that's in charge of all this, that, and the other.
His wife.
Yeah. And you go down and
Which was
and
great.
you go to the shooting range, and I mean it's a great tutorial. It really is. You learn to use the Magnum and then the Bullseye and the Marksman and whatever. And then all hell breaks loose, and you have to get out because the big satellite vapor beam thing is coming. and everybody has to split up, and it's pretty terribly sad. And, of course, not everybody makes it. And then you got to go and get this core thing that's going to help restore this aircraft that you need. And once you finally do that, most of your team gets decimated, but somehow you manage to get the core thing. Then you get the aircraft, and the aircraft kind of gets shot down, and that's when you end up alone in that, weird valley, gulch, forest area, and you got to fight your way through that.
Yeah,
and then eventually you just meet new people. You meet the religious girl on the train that takes you to the crazy preacher, and it seems odd, but you need that. Like, you need all of it to be able to get through it, and they all have a good story. And the voice acting, I think, was pretty well done.
Yeah.
The production in those areas was pretty well done. And, as you alluded to earlier, it was done through gameplay. It wasn't just cutscenes or, quick time events. It was, you were doing it. And you had to make some kind of hard choices at times that didn't really affect the end of the game, but they were still there in the moment.
There was a lot of effective visual storytelling and active storytelling, meaning like during the gameplay, characters were talking, and you would pick up backstory as things were going on. Maybe you were like running along with a certain character, and they would tell you their story. They would tell you more about the colony that they're in charge of, or and I mean, that's what the game was to me, was like this tour of America and these people trying to survive in this messed up situation. Mm-hmm. And you saw all these different examples of how people cope and how people survive in that situation. And they're all fictional, it's all hypothetical, but you can see that. You can imagine that.
Yeah.
There's the people that gravitate towards religion. There's the just hardened survivors who use technology and whatever they can to survive, and they're resourceful. And then there's the fucked up criminals who have overtaken a prison, and they're eating people.
And as if you don't have enough on your plate, so to speak, you got to fight those things off while you're trying to.
I think that was actually my least favorite part in the whole game.
Probably.
The prison sequence. But you also got that crazy gun that shot the animal, the little insects.
Yeah, that one was totally. Ratchet and Clank. I mean, really.
Yeah, very. It was great,
though. So this was also one of the very early games that used PlayStation Move and also allowed for use of the sharpshooter. And
can I just say one more thing about the story before we get into that?
No, I'd rather you didn't.
But I'm going to anyway. The scene where Malakov dies, I was devastated.
Yeah, see? Crazy doctor.
Completely devastated. That's what I mean. The story isn't the best. It's similar to The Last of Us, but the story is not The Last of Us.
No.
It's just not quite on that level. The writing's not quite on that level, and the presentation and everything. But it's effective.
Yes.
Because when that guy shot Malakov, I was pissed.
Yeah?
I was devastated. I sat there with my jaw on the floor for 5 minutes. I couldn't believe what had just happened. So, anyway, I enjoyed the story.
No, the story had some real moments in it, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But it's not a game that lives on just story.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But just what made that moment so effective for me was that it took almost that entire time for Joe to really accept Malakov and come to an understanding with him. And also, Malakov was kind of the only hope for humanity because he knew what to do.
Yeah.
He knew how to end the Chimera threat. Joe didn't really. He was just the muscle.
Yeah. He's like Eugene from The Walking Dead, except he wasn't lying. Right?
Right.
Walking Dead spoilers, by the way.
So that moment just devastated me. You could say what you will about what happens after that, because after that is the prison sequence, and then Joe somehow just figures out that he can just blow shit up, and that'll solve the problem anyway. So
yeah, but they had to go through a lot of stuff for him to be able to figure that out. I mean, it's it's kind of like, I don't know, I guess Mass Effect 2 with the whole hive thing. You learn to take one out, they're all connected, like the harbingers, and like it needed all that for Joe to figure that out. And I don't know, I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, PlayStation Move support in 3D. Did you try either of those?
No.
I tried both. They were terrible.
What was it like using the Move?
Well, I had that sharpshooter thing from that you could get, which first came out for like Killzone 3, I think it was.
Okay.
And it just wasn't the same. Like, it wasn't ineffective, and it's not like it didn't work right, but it just felt better with controls in hand. In 3D, I'm not a big fan of 3D, as I've talked about on, well, maybe not this show, but our previous show. It just seemed like it was something Sony was really into, so they had to throw it in there. But my bigger point is, it didn't really take away from the game. Like, I don't feel like having that support made the game any worse. Also, fun fact, I have like 6 Move controllers, so when the PlayStation VR finally comes out, I will be a little bit ahead of the game.
Nice.
I'm assuming they're the same ones. I hope so.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to use those with PSVR.
But
that's cool. Yeah, I can't imagine playing a game with that, a first-person shooter with that.
It just feels weird.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't blame them for trying. It was a neat idea. Obviously, it never really caught on.
Right.
Also, fun fact, I bought SOCOM 4 just so I could get an early beta to this game. And then, like, literally a week later, they gave the beta to PS Plus users. I was kind of irritated by that.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, what about the multiplayer? I think I played a couple rounds of it, but I didn't really dive into it.
So here's the thing about the multiplayer. It's one of the few competitive multiplayer games that I was actually decent at. And maybe that's why I liked it. I think the only other multiplayer game I've spent more time in is probably Uncharted 2, and that's really because I was just playing with friends. I'm not a multiplayer guru, so I can't really speak well to it. But
neither of us are.
But it was fun. I mean,
unless we're talking Rocket League.
Well,
I still play that nightly.
Yes, as you should. It's kind of like saying the Lord's Prayer before you go to bed for you.
That's right.
But it was fun, and it wasn't overly, like, it didn't have a lot of. It had an easy learning curve, and you didn't feel like such an idiot just trying to play it when you weren't great at those games.
Yeah.
It had like 5 different modes. I mean, it was nothing special. Like, of course, deathmatch, team deathmatch, capture the flag. I don't know that that's exactly what they were called, but it was the same concept. But it was neat. It was fun, and it was kind of cool to be able to play as the Chimera. And not that the story had anything to do with it, but I enjoyed the multiplayer in this game, and I can't say that for most games. So that was a bonus for me, I guess.
I'm trying to remember. It had all the same weapons, all the crazy weapons and stuff. How was that? How did they balance that?
I wasn't.
I mean, because if you can,
I wasn't prepared for that
shoot
question.
through walls, or I mean, I'm just trying to
discount double check.
Like, picture it.
I don't know.
Discount double check. Sure. I mean, you weren't a developer on the game, so I understand, but
I guess the same way that they balance any multiplayer. You often do have the same type of weapons. It was more of using them properly at the right times, and the single player taught me how to do that fairly well, I thought. I mean, like you, true. I played through this game 3 full times. The only reason I didn't get the platinum trophy is because there were some insane things you had to do in multiplayer to be able to get the platinum trophy. I want to think you had to be like ranked top 10 in the world at one time to be able to get the.
Oh my god!
Yeah, and that just wasn't possible. I may be thinking of Killzone. I'm not entirely sure, but if not for that, I would totally have the platinum trophy on this game.
I'm not even into trophies, but that's terrible trophy implementation.
It is, and I don't think they would do it again.
Do you think that one of the reasons you were able to really enjoy the multiplayer is because it wasn't super popular, and so there weren't Call of Duty professional level players?
There weren't skilled players that have nothing better to do but sit home all day and level up. And I mean, Kim.com was not playing the game, I guess, if that makes sense.
That's kind of how I felt about Homefront. I really got into the multiplayer in Homefront.
I did too, actually, a little bit. Homefront is another great game that is highly underrated that I think you and I both enjoyed very much.
Definitely.
Highly
sure
underrated.
I would say it's one of the best games, period.
I don't know that I would say that either, but it's better than what it was given credit for.
Definitely. I agree. Especially the multiplayer. I really enjoyed that game's multiplayer. It's probably one of the only first-person shooters that I got super into.
I'll never forget having to lay in a ditch full of dead bodies in that game to hide and try to get past the enemy. I mean, that totally brings back memories of, not my personal memories, I'm not going to say that, obviously, but, like the pictures you see of the Holocaust and World War II.
Yeah.
And the newspaper clippings in that game, kind of like the dossiers and Resistance 3, I loved them. I really did.
Yeah. I mean, very similar games in that kind of way, like both kind of you're part of a resistance group fighting an oppressive force. One of the things I do want to touch on, and you mentioned it earlier, that compared to games like Killzone 2 and 3 and Uncharted, like in Battlefield 3, like this was not one of the prettiest first-person shooters at the time, and it is it falls into that same trap that we mentioned in the Enslaved episode of games that looked super brown and drab and gray.
Yes.
But there's also there's also a lot of color. There's just flashes of color here and there in some of the enemies, and I think the effects, the weapon effects, really stand out because they contrast with the dreary backgrounds and environments.
And once you get to that, I guess spaceship area, it kind of changes a little bit, and it does better. And in Insomniac's credit, they made cartoon games, and there's nothing wrong with that. And, of course, they made Resistance 1 and 2 before this, but I think that the evolution that they showed between 1, 2, and 3, 3 did stand out definitely as far as graphics, color, fluidity, when they were a developer that was totally used to making just fun, cartoony type games. And they did those very well, and Lord knows I want to go see the Ratchet and Clank movie, and I'm going to play the next Ratchet and Clank game, and I love Insomniac dearly. But it was kind of a bold move for them to try something new, and I think that they pulled it off well. The second game, not so much. The first game was good. especially for being a launch PlayStation 3 game when you look at the other launch PlayStation 3 games. Second game, I think they tried to do something that was a little more considered popular and mainstream, and it kind of bit them in the butt.
Yeah.
Third game, they kind of went back to their formula of just the crazy weapons, crazy gameplay, but they also did a really great job of enhancing what they learned from 1 and 2, and I think it made it a classic. I really do.
You know, the graphics might not have been technically as impressive, and it might have been drab and brown, but the art direction in that game is still incredible. I remember I was actually in talks for a while to write up an article. I used to do these articles for the Game Effect called Unsung Heroes. I did one about one of our, I think he listens to the show, Rob Kehoe, who is a tester at Bungie. And the articles were just about people that have a job at the developer working on games, but they're not like one of the star developers. You don't know their names. And one of the articles I was working on was with one of the artists, concept artists on Resistance 3. He ended up backing out of it because he left Insomniac. But the concept art in this from this game is beautiful. Look up some Resistance 3 concept art. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
How interesting the world that they created, and some of those scenes, I mean, they are intricately crafted, and they know that you're watching them through the first person, and you might not see them at the exact perfect angle. So they had to make it look good no matter what. Like I said, when you have this giant robot coming down, like stepping right in front of your boat, like you feel so minuscule, but it looks amazing. And the way they used fog, the way they framed some of those action sequences, and much like The Last of Us, like they captured the look and feel of America that's been destroyed from this foreign force. Like, it's just beautiful to look at.
It certainly felt authentic, yes.
Yeah, definitely. How about the cover art? That's pretty contentious cover art.
You mean the
as
weird
far as video
double
games go.
chimera skull thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I remember right, it had a reversible leaflet.
I think so.
In fact, I'm almost
sure.
positive it did. I liked it. I don't know that I loved it. I don't know that it hurt the game or helped the game.
It was, so for background, the cover art was designed by Ollie Moss, who's very well-known artist. Very stylized, interesting look to his art. Kind of pop art. He's done some really cool stuff with Star Wars and other properties. Most recently, he's one of the art directors on Firewatch.
I do remember a lot of people not liking the cover art, and there were all those, I don't know if they're memes or people doing their own cover art that came out that said, better Resistance 3 cover art. But sometimes there's beauty in simplicity.
Yeah. Exactly. I love the cover art. I think it's beautiful. I know some people, like, for instance, Colin Moriarty often blames that cover art for the game not selling well. And I think that's kind of dismissive of the poor marketing that they did. But also dismissive of just the fact that that game came out at kind of a wrong time.
It did.
I think
there was a couple other games that released that same day that were huge. I can't recall what they are right offhand. But
if not that same day, like the next week or
within
soon
a couple
thereafter.
week period. I mean, I want to.
Yeah. There was Gears of War 2. Came out around that time.
I almost want to say Skyrim, but I'm pretty sure that was winter.
Yeah, it was. Skyrim came out around... I mean, this came out in September-ish?
Yeah, I think Skyrim came out like in October.
Yeah, but still, I mean, that's not that far.
Yeah.
As far as, I mean, they're
I'm
both
shooting
still
from the hip here.
holiday.
Again,
yeah.
But yeah, I think release time. I do personally enjoy the cover art, like you. But, you know, this game had a few things going against it in regards to what you're alluding to. You know, timing, so on and so forth. Doesn't make it a bad game, though.
No, I agree.
So, in your pantheon of games, we're a little over an hour here, and I don't want to make poor Jack edit too terribly much.
Yep.
Is this a game that you think other people should go back and play? I mean, you got to be able to find it on the cheap now.
I believe it's on PlayStation now.
It is.
So, I've resigned myself to using that to recommend.
I will say
people
that
go back and play games.
If you want to play this game for the multiplayer, the servers have been shut down. So
yeah,
there's that.
You won't be able to play the multiplayer.
There were a couple DLC packs. One of them was strictly multiplayer. The other one was a little bit of both, and you can still get the other one if you choose to. I mean, I think you can buy the entire trilogy for like $20, honestly.
It can't be much. But I would absolutely recommend this game to anybody that enjoys shooters. So as somebody that loves shooters and as somebody that thinks that first-person shooters have had a big impact on the industry as a whole and that their place in the industry is important, I would say this is one of the best shooters I've ever played, period. From my point of view, my opinion, it's one of the best games, period.
Okay.
What about you? What do you think?
I absolutely think it's one of the best games, period, and I think everybody should play it. It's cheap, it's not too terribly long, and it's, you know, it's just a cool, very fun game.
Yeah.
So, yes.
For sure. And it is on PlayStation now, so if you have a PlayStation 4 and you want to play it, it's $1.99 for 4 hours. Yeah. So, if you don't like money, do that.
Sure.
What are we doing next week?
Well,
GoldenEye.
Is that what we're gonna do next week?
I believe so. I'm just gonna say it, and then we're gonna have to.
Alrighty then.
Okay.
I mean, you are the outro guy, so you're the boss.
You know what, Jeremy? I want to thank you for joining me tonight.
Well, you're welcome. I had a choice.
And you did have a choice. But you couldn't resist coming on to talk about Resistance 3.
That's true. It is one of my favorite games, and I do believe it's the best game, period, so you're right.
And you know what? Thank you, listener, for joining us and listening to episode 11 of the Best Games, period. Sans Jack. Sorry, Jack. We love you.
I will note,
get better.
It's episode 11, which is a special episode, so Resistance 3 being episode 11 is, you know, I kind of dig that.
Yeah, I thought you'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's why I picked out Resistance 3 for episode 11. If you like the show, please let us know. You can let us know on Twitter at the Best Games, period. Or, I'm sorry, at Best Games, period. You can listen to the show on SoundCloud, Libsyn, iTunes, and you can even watch a video version of it on YouTube. We would love comments on YouTube. If you see the link on Extra Life's Facebook page, give us a comment. Let us know how you like the show, how you feel about Resistance 3. Have you played it? Contrary to what we said, do you dislike Resistance 3? Let us know. We want to have a dialogue with the folks that listen to the show.
And if you dislike it, I sincerely want to know why.
Definitely. So, we think it's one of the best games, period. Let us know if you think it's one of the best games, period. Come back next week for what should be an interesting discussion on the Nintendo classic the rare classic, GoldenEye 007 and 64. I know that we said GoldenEye was going to be last week, but because Jack wasn't going to be on the show, I wanted him to be on the GoldenEye episode. So next week will be GoldenEye. Not this week, obviously. You just listen to the show. Until next time, thanks for listening.
Get well, Jack. We hope your golden crown is better in time for